Imagine walking through the heart of Yangon or Mandalay at noon on a Tuesday. Normally, it's a sensory overload, the relentless blare of car horns, the shouts of street vendors, and the thick, humid air selling of diesel and frying snacks. But today, the silence is deafening. Every shop shutter is pulled tight, every balcony is empty, and the wide boulevards are completely abandoned. It's not a holiday, and it's not a lockdown. It's a silent strike, where the simple act of staying home has become the most potent weapon in the country. While the streets are eerily quiet, the halls of the military government are buzzing with a very different kind of energy. The generals are busy drafting blueprints for a grand controlled election set for 2026. To them, this is the master plan to finally project an image of stability and legitimacy to a skeptical world. They are acting as if they are the undisputed masters of the house, preparing the guest rooms for a party they insist will happen. But there is a massive gaping hole in their logic. While they are planning elections in the capital, they have effectively lost the keys to their own front door. Thousands of miles away at the borders, the country's economic lifeblood, the trade gates to China, have been snatched away by ethnic armed groups. The very corridors that were supposed to turn Myanmar into a strategic bridge to the Indian Ocean are now slipping through the military's fingers. The contrast is jarring. A regime obsessed with a future vote that nobody wants, while the ground beneath their feet is literally being carved up in the present. This isn't just a local uprising anymore, it's a total survival crisis that is forcing neighboring superpowers to look at their maps and wonder if they've been betting on the wrong side all along. The silence in the streets of Yangon isn't just a protest, it's the sound of a regime losing its grip on reality. Okay, so let's unpack this. That opening scenario really paints a picture of the massive internal pressures that are just tearing Myanmar apart right now.
It really does. The contrast it's stark.
So for our deep dive today, our mission is to zoom way out from that chaos on the ground and look at the enormous geopolitical prize that Myanmar represents. And that prize is really all about one thing: the Indian Ocean.
Right. We're going to spend a good amount of time analyzing this high-stakes strategic game between China and India. You've got these two rising Asian powers, and their massive, trillion-dollar ambitions are clashing right in this maritime space.
And this collision point, Myanmar, is just so fascinating. It forces us to really get into the details, the specific economic and military blueprints that each country is pushing to try and control this vital region.
And we're going to look at everything: the ports, the naval strategies, the alternative trade corridors they're trying to build. But the key, I think, is to analyze how the instability in Myanmar, that chaos we just described, how that is directly threatening these huge long-term visions for both New Delhi and Beijing.
It's not just a contest over who has more ships in the water, is it?
Not at all. This is a race for absolute resource security and really for future global influence. It's that fundamental.
This rivalry is playing out through these huge infrastructure projects, complex diplomatic moves. But before we get into the corridors and the ports, we have to establish why. Why the Indian Ocean? Why is it suddenly, the most strategic body of water on the planet? Why are two nuclear-armed rivals focusing so intensely on this one space?
It really all starts with geography. The pure geographic imperative. Sure, the Indian Ocean is the third largest ocean, but its size isn't what makes it so strategic. It's the bottlenecks.
The choke points.
Exactly, the choke points. It has the world's most crucial straits. You have Hormuz, which is the gateway for pretty much all Persian Gulf oil. You have Bab el-Mandeb, which leads you right to the Suez Canal. And then maybe the most critical one for Asia, the Strait of Malacca, that tiny, narrow passage between Malaysia and Indonesia.
And this isn't a new idea, right? This has been a strategic fact for centuries. I'm thinking of naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan, who said, whoever controls the Indian Ocean can rule Asia. And that idea is just amplified 100 times over by modern global commerce and, our total reliance on oil.
And that reliance is tied directly to the sheer wealth of the region. The natural resources in and around the Indian Ocean they're just staggering.
Okay, break that down for us.
So if you look at fossil fuels, the region holds something like 62% of global oil reserves and 35% of natural gas.
Wow.
But it's not just that. The strategic mineral concentration is just as important. We're talking 40% of the world's gold, 60% of uranium, and 80% of diamonds. So this ocean isn't just a highway for trade. It's a massive repository of resources that are absolutely essential for high-tech manufacturing and, for projecting geopolitical power.
So let's connect that resource wealth to the giant engine that is China. Beijing's got this economic miracle, we all know that, but it also has this enormous, almost existential energy security crisis.
Yeah.
And it's tied directly to this ocean.
Directly. China imports a staggering 60% of its oil and natural gas needs from the Middle East and Central Asia. Their entire economic prosperity, everything, is completely linked to the smooth, unobstructed flow of ships on this ocean.
The problem for China, though, is its geography, right? It's a vulnerability.
It's a massive vulnerability. If you just trace the path of those imports on a map, more than 80% of that vital energy supply has to travel across the Indian Ocean and then through the South China Sea. That flow has to move smoothly from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz into the Bay of Bengal, and then it has to squeeze through that incredibly narrow, shallow, and highly trafficked Strait of Malacca.
Which brings us to the famous Malacca dilemma.
Precisely. That's the term for it. If that narrow strait were to be blocked, by a conflict, piracy, or a rival navy like the U.S. or India-China's economy would effectively seize up, within weeks.
That's it. Weeks.
Weeks. They have some overland pipelines, sure, but they're massive industrial machine. Mm-hmm. It just cannot survive without the continuous huge flow of energy delivered by sea tankers. This extreme dependency on that sea route is the single biggest driver for China's multi-decade campaign to expand its naval presence in the Indian Ocean.
And critically, to diversify its trade and energy routes around Malacca.
That's the key. That is the entire genesis of their strategic approach in a place like Myanmar. It all comes back to getting around Malacca.
Okay, so that sets the stage for India, which sees the Indian Ocean not just as a route, but as its backyard, its necessary domain.
It really is. India has a huge geographical advantage. It's located right in the center of it all, with over 7,500 kilometers of coastline. And historically, this region is New Delhi's undisputed sphere of influence.
And their economy is just as dependent on these waters.
Absolutely. From an economic standpoint, India's lifeblood runs through this ocean. 95% of its international trade by volume and 68% by value passes through these waters.
And what about energy?
For energy, it's about 80% of its crude oil needs, all imported by sea through this corridor. And if you include India's own offshore production and exports, that dependency on maritime trade for oil shoots up to around 93%. So if those shipping lanes were disrupted, the economic consequences for India would be devastating and immediate.
So for India, the region is its security valve. The priority for New Delhi isn't just about trade. It's about protecting these sea lines of communication, the SLOCs, from everything. Naval threats, terrorism, piracy.
Yes, but increasingly the goal is also to expand its maritime reach eastward, to specifically challenge and counterbalance China's rising influence, this string of pearl strategy that China is pursuing.
We'll get into that in a second.
India sees that as a direct threat to its long-held regional dominance. It simply cannot afford to see its geographic centrality eroded.
So what you realize pretty quickly is that for both of these nations, the Indian Ocean is not a luxury. It's a necessity.
It's survival. For China, it's energy survival. For India, it's territorial and economic security. And that is why the strategic investments we are about to discuss are measured in the tens of billions of dollars.
Okay, so given this overwhelming strategic pressure, China has developed this highly sophisticated, multi-pronged strategy. It's primarily anchored in the massive infrastructure push we all know as the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. It's often described as using economic force. What does that actually mean in practical terms?
In practice, it means using enormous, readily available state capital to expand political influence and diversify strategic routes. China offers what developing nations need most: money for infrastructure.
But it's not charity.
Oh, not at all. There's always a hook. By financing and constructing these commercial port facilities all across South Asia, China gains leverage, access, and potential long-term strategic control. The key ports are source material points to really form the roadmap of this ambition. You've got Chittagong in Bangladesh, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, Gwadar in Pakistan, and of course the key prize for this discussion, the entry point into Myanmar, Kyaukpyu.
But this isn't just about building a better dock for ships, is it?
Yeah.
China has this signature economic approach they use, something they perfected at home in places like Shiku. It's called the Port Park City model, the PPC model.
That's where the real strategic depth comes in. The PPC model is basically integrated urban planning with a very specific strategic agenda. The process starts with building the deep sea port. That's the anchor asset.
Okay.
This port then requires an adjacent industrial park, and this usually has free trade zones, export processing areas, logistics hubs, all designed to attract global manufacturers.
And then the city.
And finally, it all culminates in developing the city. This means massive investment in transport infrastructure, commercial services, high-end residential areas to support the new workforce. It's a total ecosystem.
It sounds incredibly comprehensive. But what's the inherent financial leverage that China gains from this model? How do they get control?
Well, the mechanism really relies heavily on debt financing. China provides the funds, usually through its state-backed banks like the China Exim Bank, for the host nation to build the port and everything else.
And when a developing nation struggles to repay those enormous loans,
which many of them do, China steps in to restructure the debt. And that often means taking control of the asset itself. This is how you see commercial control turn into strategic control, often through these 99-year leases. So the model facilitates the movement of goods, yes, but fundamentally it establishes a long-term, inescapable Chinese presence right in the economic core of that host nation.
And we have a couple of really profound case studies of this model in action. First, let's talk about Djibouti City in East Africa. It's a project that links both the BRI and that military string of pearls idea.
That's right. China poured something like $15 billion into Djibouti's port and inland development. Their goal is to replicate the rapid development of Shenzhen. They're building rail, pipelines, roads, including the $4 billion Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, all to turn this tiny nation into the economic Sheku of East Africa.
So they see Djibouti as a gateway.
A crucial gateway. A gateway to the economies of the Horn of Africa, essentially bridging the Indian Ocean trade network with the entire African continent. And this establishes China as the leading external trade player in the whole region.
Okay, now let's go closer to the rivalry with India. We have the Colombo Port City, or CPC, in Sri Lanka.
The CPC is just a massive undertaking. It's Sri Lanka's largest single foreign direct investment, valued at $1.4 billion, and it's all funded by the China Communications Construction Company, the CCCC.
And this project involves literally creating new land.
That's right. They're reclaiming 269 hectares of land from the sea right off the coast of Colombo. They're turning what was ocean into a special economic zone. The vision is to create a globally competitive financial and service hub for South Asia.
And the projected numbers are huge.
They are. It's expected to spur another $15 billion in secondary investment and create something like 83,000 local jobs. So by effectively creating this autonomous financialized territory on reclaimed land, China secures a massive economic foothold right on India's doorstep. And it's all backed by the implicit threat of debt control.
So China uses infrastructure and economic power to lay the groundwork. But infrastructure alone doesn't secure a corridor. Once these ports are built and the trade routes are established, how does Beijing make sure the People's Liberation Army Navy, the plan, can protect them? And that's where the military aspect, the string of pearls, comes in.
The string of pearls is the definitive military strategy here. It refers to China's establishment of a line of strategic port points and logistical hubs running all the way from Hainan Island across Southeast Asia and clear to the Persian Gulf.
The objective isn't exactly subtle, is it?
Not at all. The goal is twofold. First, secure control over those crucial shipping routes and guarantee their energy security. And second, to challenge India's traditional dominance in the Indian Ocean by establishing these strategic points for planned operations, resupply, intelligence gathering. It fundamentally alters the military balance of power.
And the speed of this expansion has been remarkable.
It's incredible. In the 1990s, planned port visits in the Indian Ocean were practically zero. Since 2010, they've averaged nearly 20 visits per year. That is a massive, sustained expansion of their ability to project maritime power.
And this ambition has now materialized into actual overseas military facilities, not just commercial docks they can visit.
Exactly. The most prominent example is Djibouti. That's where China constructed its first official overseas military base, which opened in August 2017.
And the base itself is significant.
The wharf expansion there is highly significant. It provides enough capacity to accommodate a fleet of at least 4 large ships, including the massive Type 901 support ship. And that's a vessel designed specifically for at-sea replenishment, far from China's shores. So this transforms a commercial foothold into a genuine forward-operating military base with the capacity to sustain extended deployments.
And the next critical pearl that everyone speculates will gain military utility is Gwadar in Pakistan.
Gwadar is perhaps the most strategic of all of them. It's leased by China until 2059. It is the crucial endpoint of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, which is this multi-billion-dollar investment in transport and industry.
And its location is key.
Its location is everything. It's in Balochistan province, right near the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz. That makes it invaluable for controlling the flow of Middle Eastern oil. It is widely considered a future overseas base for the Chinese Navy, meant to complement the base in Djibouti. And satellite images have confirmed continuous construction, which suggests a major bolstering of its strategic importance. If that port becomes fully militarized, it would fundamentally alter the naval balance near India's western flank.
So China has successfully leveraged finance and infrastructure to create this formidable network, right in what India has always considered its own backyard. This pressure demanded a sophisticated, equally robust response from New Delhi.
India faced a critical moment. It really did. Relying solely on historical dominance wasn't going to cut it anymore, especially with China's rapid financial attacks on smaller states like Sri Lanka and the Maldives. New Delhi had to pivot from some of its ineffective past tactics like economic blockades toward a much more constructive, multi-layered engagement. And this is something Prime Minister Modi crystallized pretty early in his tenure.
And this whole shift is really captured in India's key strategic vision, the SAGAR Doctrine.
Right. SAGAR means ocean in Hindi, but the acronym actually stands for Security and Growth for All in the Region.
So it's a message of cooperation.
It is. The doctrine focuses on enhanced maritime cooperation, establishing an atmosphere of trust, and promoting peaceful conflict resolution. The central idea is to present India not as a dominant power, but as a reliable security provider and a long-term economic partner. A better partner than Beijing, essentially.
And this diplomatic outreach, it paid off pretty quickly, didn't it?
Absolutely. India immediately prioritized its neighbors. They invited leaders from the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, to the Prime Minister's first swearing-in ceremony. This diplomatic push strengthened talks with key players like Bangladesh, and they cemented agreements on land boundaries, energy, counterterrorism.
And that deepened trust had real-world consequences for China's plans.
It was directly correlated with Bangladesh's decision to cancel a major Chinese-backed deep-sea port project at Sanadia. That outcome showed that focused diplomatic effort could actually succeed in countering China's financial might.
Okay, another key arena where India really had to fight hard to regain influence was the Maldives. Chinese lending had been heavily focused on infrastructure there. So what specific high-impact aid package did India use to turn the tide?
India countered with massive, highly visible aid and credit packages. The government extended $1.4 billion in aid to help the Maldives overcome some severe economic hardship, which was a huge commitment.
But the specificity of their infrastructure financing is the real story here.
That's right. In late 2020, India's Exim Bank signed a credit agreement for $400 million, and it was specifically designated for the Greater Mail Connectivity Project, or GMCP.
And this is a very visible project.
Very visible. A large-scale job-creating project that acts as a direct counterbalance to China's most prominent achievement there, the China-Maldives Friendship Bridge. It represents one of the largest loan packages India has provided to any neighboring country, and it demonstrates a robust soft power commitment to infrastructure. It challenges that narrative that only Beijing can fund big development projects.
So if China is building these strategic pearls across the Indian Ocean, India needs its own strategic anchor points to secure its perimeter. This leads us to the development of India's counterport at Chabahar in Iran. Now, this is strategically brilliant, located way up in the Gulf of Oman, but given the geopolitical risks of partnering with Iran and the constant threat of U.S. sanctions, is this truly a reliable long-term counterbalance to Gwadar?
And that is the core strategic paradox. Chabahar is essential, but it is fragile. India's strategic investment in Iran's only deep-sea port with direct ocean access is vital because of where it is. It sits right at the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz. India committed substantial investment and officially took over operations of the Shahid Beheshti port in late 2018.
And its function is clear. It helps India secure its western flank, and it gives them direct monitoring capability.
Exactly. It gives India a secure presence in a vital area that allows them to closely monitor Chinese developments at Gwadar Port, which is just 72 miles away by sea.
So they can literally see what's going on.
And they can see what's going on. India commenced full port operations in May of 2021. And that move wasn't just symbolic. It effectively gave India eyes on Gwadar and a strategic trade route into Afghanistan and Central Asia, bypassing Pakistan entirely. But you're right, the reliance on Iran and the periodic threat of sanctions means the whole project operates under this cloud of political risk. It forces India to maintain these delicate diplomatic relationships all over the world just to protect this one investment.
Moving from these unilateral projects to partnerships, India is also using strategic alliances, especially with Japan, to challenge the monolithic nature of the BRI. And they're doing that through the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, or AGC.
This is a crucial multilateral response, and it emphasizes quality over just speed. India and Japan are collaborating on this free corridor plan, which is specifically designed as an alternative to China's unilateral approach.
And the focus is on quality.
The AGC focuses heavily on improving the quality and the transparency of infrastructure projects. And that's a direct contrast to the doubts that have been raised about the sustainability, the environmental impact, and the debt burden of some of these BRI projects. So this focus on ethical, high-quality infrastructure and genuine collaboration is meant to be a more attractive, long-term proposition for local governments.
And we see them jointly developing projects across the region.
We do. They're jointly planning the expansion of Trincomalee Port in eastern Sri Lanka, which is a strategically important deepwater harbor. Crucially, they are cooperating on the development of Dawe Port along the Thailand-Myanmar border. And that project links Southeast Asia directly into the Indian Ocean via India's connectivity projects. The AGC aims to connect corridors like the Mekong-India Economic Corridor with special economic zones in East Africa, all via major Indian ports like Jawaharlal Nehru and Kochi. It expands India's strategic and commercial reach deep into the Indo-Pacific and Africa.
Okay, finally, we have to look at how India is strengthening its military connectivity to ensure dominance in its traditional sphere. This involves heavy domestic investment and some really unprecedented international access agreements.
Domestically, India is prioritizing naval modernization. It's all part of the Make in India initiative. The goal is to evolve the Indian Navy into a strong, blue water naval power by 2030, capable of deterring any maritime threats in the region within the decade. But true power projection, that relies on logistics.
And that's where the series of logistics agreements comes in, giving India access all over the globe.
Absolutely. So India established the Information Fusion Center Indian Ocean Regional, or IFC-IOR, to closely monitor all ship activity. But the strategic key is securing access to foreign military facilities through these agreements. The most significant was the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, or LEMOA, signed with the U.S. in 2016.
Okay, explain LEMOA simply for us. What does this arrangement actually allow India's Navy to do?
Think of it this way. LEMOA and similar agreements basically allow India's Navy to treat allied bases like U.S., French, or Singaporean bases as their own private pre-approved gas stations in the middle of a massive ocean.
Wow, okay.
It means an Indian warship operating thousands of miles from its home port doesn't need to carry every single spare part or every last drop of fuel it might need. It can refuel, rearm, and resupply quickly and seamlessly at facilities in the U.S. territory of Guam, the French base at Reunion, or the Singaporean Changi Naval Base. This dramatically extends the operational reach and endurance of the Indian Navy. It exponentially increases their ability to patrol and dominate the entire Indian Ocean and even beyond.
And they have secured similar access globally.
They have. Beyond the U.S. and France, they've finalized or signed similar arrangements with Singapore, South Korea, Australia, Japan, and Russia. This diplomatic effort essentially creates this resilient operational network that directly counters and limits the utility of the Chinese string of pearls.
And this increased cooperation is also showing up in these multilateral military exercises.
For sure. The biennial Milan naval exercise, hosted by the Indian Navy, has expanded dramatically. It's now expected to include the navies of up to 30 countries. And then there's the Malabar Maritime Event, which previously involved just the U.S. and Japan. In 2020, it saw the crucial addition of Australia,
which solidified the military part of the Quad.
It cemented the military component of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad. This expansion was a direct, unified response to China's increasing military assertiveness, especially after that highly tense 2020 border clash. It showed India's determination to cooperate with major global powers to counterbalance Chinese influence.
And so this incredible web of strategic competition played out through financial diplomacy, counterports, naval alliances. It all comes crashing back down in Myanmar. The instability we described at the start is where the theory of geopolitics meets the very, very chaotic ground reality. The Kyaukpyu deep sea port. It's the crown jewel. It's central to China's entire strategy. It was designed to be a transformative hub for regional energy security.
It is Beijing's perfect solution to the Malacca dilemma. By connecting Kyaukpyu on the Bay of Bengal directly via pipelines to Yunnan province, China gets direct, secured access to the Indian Ocean. It bypasses the vulnerable Strait of Malacca entirely. This is essential for their long-term economic stability and, most importantly, for guaranteeing China's energy supply. It represents the crucial link in the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, or CMAC. But it's a vision that's just been plagued by local reality.
We have to consider the frustrating human perspective of the local community. I mean, think of someone like my kin, a local engineering graduate living right there near the port in Rakhine State. She talked about watching these massive tankers arrive, vessels meant to secure energy security for faraway Chinese cities, while her own neighborhood was experiencing constant, frustrating blackouts.
Her experience just perfectly illustrates this massive development gap that fuels resistance. To her, Kyaukpyu isn't a transformative hub for Myanmar. It's an extractive project that serves foreign powers. She pointed out that while the port is meant to integrate the Indian Ocean corridor into global trade, her village is relying on smoky, expensive diesel generators for basic light. This disparity, it just fuels deep local resistance and skepticism. It shows that strategic importance is meaningless if local communities feel they are just coordinates on a map rather than beneficiaries of a project.
And this local resistance, this widespread public distrust, is one of the key reasons why the associated infrastructure projects, especially the ambitious China-Myanmar railway project, have stalled so completely.
Well, the railway was designed to run parallel to the existing oil and gas pipelines. It was supposed to form this southwest strategic corridor for freight coming from landlocked Yunnan and Guizhou provinces. But on the crucial Myanmar sites, specifically the Mandalay to Kyaukpyu segment, construction has barely even begun, despite the strategic urgency for Beijing.
And the reasons for the halt are this fascinating mix of politics, economics, and ethnic complexity. I mean, first, public distrust is rampant because the deals were struck exclusively with the central government. There was zero transparency for local stakeholders.
That's the first big hurdle. Local communities were often left to bear the environmental costs of land seizure and construction with very few direct benefits. So that leads to profound local skepticism. They saw the central government, which they already distrusted, signing away rights to these Chinese entities, which were seen as completely opaque.
And then you just layer on top of that the sheer complexity of ethnic politics in Myanmar, which makes construction literally impossible in many regions.
Correct. Many of these proposed Chinese-backed projects cross northern regions that are controlled by minority armed groups or ethnic armed organizations, EAOs, and they fundamentally distrust the central military government. These EAOs often use disrupting infrastructure as a direct form of leverage against the regime.
So they might demand taxes or just block access entirely.
Exactly. They might demand taxes for passage, or they may just refuse access altogether because they see the project as an attempt by the central power structure to consolidate control over their territory. So when Beijing negotiates a deal with the military in the capital, the EAOs on the ground actively resist it, turning the planned rail route into a constant, dangerous negotiation.
On top of that, you have competing foreign interests, especially from Japan, offering Myanmar alternatives, which dilutes the leverage China has over infrastructure development. Japan's actively upgrading the key Yangon-Mandalay Railway using a significant aid package.
And then finally, the sheer political turmoil since the 2021 coup has basically frozen the most sensitive stretch of that rail line. The Mandalay-Kyaukpyu segment crosses regions tied to these deep internal conflicts, including the Rohingya crisis, where state control is fragile and nationalist sentiment runs incredibly high. Any foreign project risks sparking local protests or becoming a target for resistance groups unless these Chinese firms can navigate those incredibly complex village networks, religious groups, and clan-based authority structures, which is something they have repeatedly failed to do.
This deep internal instability, symbolized by that silent strike and the loss of key border trade gates to ethnic armed groups, has resulted in the military regime losing control of its economic arteries. It shatters the whole concept of seamless regional connectivity.
And the human cost of this disruption really reveals how fragile that concept is. We have the poignant example of Yune Wen, a veteran long-haul trucker. He was stuck behind a front line held by ethnic armed groups at the critical Muse border crossing with China. He sat in his truck for days watching his cargo of perishable fruit just rot in the tropical heat because the road, his ribbon of asphalt for survival, was closed. For him and thousands of others, the global policy concept of regional connectivity is meaningless when the road might not exist tomorrow. It shows that instability is a thief of both time and livelihood. It turns strategic policy into very personal loss.
But despite this monumental chaos and the failure of the original CMF plan, China is showing remarkable strategic flexibility by adapting its trade strategies. Since the 2021 coup, Beijing has established 3 new informal railroad sea trade routes to maintain access and influence.
This is a really remarkable demonstration of strategic continuity in the middle of political fragmentation. These routes were definitely not part of the original core BRI Y-shaped plan, but they provide critical, adaptable access for China's western provinces to the Indian Ocean and neighboring countries. They ensure the flow of goods continues, even if the main railway is completely stalled.
So let's just detail how these new access corridors work. First, there's a new railroad Indian Ocean route.
Right. This one connects the inland industrial hubs of Chengdu and Sichuan and Yunnan provinces, runs through northern Shan State, and then gets access to the Indian Ocean via the Yangon port before connecting onward to Singapore. It's a multimodal compromise. It relies on existing infrastructure and the slightly more stable southern port.
Okay, second, there's an important route connecting Chongqing in southwest China to Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar, which bolsters that trade triangle.
And third, they've established a new, purely maritime route. This one connects the Baibu Gulf port in China's Guangxi province directly to the Yangon port. This provides a clean, sea-based alternative that minimizes reliance on the volatile overland travel in the north.
And these new routes, alongside the originally planned projects like Kyaukpyu, are now being strategically linked to these larger regional economic mechanisms like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, and the Linkhang-Mekong Cooperation, LMC.
This is a crucial strategic move. RCEP is the world's largest free trade agreement. It encompasses about 30% of global GDP and population. By linking these new trade arteries, both the formal and informal ones, to RCEP, China is reinforcing its goal of setting regional trade standards separate from the West. Myanmar remains a critical focal point for China's regional interests because controlling access through Myanmar is essential for cementing its dominance across all of ASEAN.
And the sources show that the continuity of trade and just basic infrastructure often relies on these extraordinary local cooperative efforts, totally separate from any formal national governance. We heard about the necessity of creating these shadow collaborative frameworks.
Yes, the example of Teacher Lin, a community organizer near the Shan State border, is so poignant. She had to facilitate a secret collaborative framework meeting that involved local elders, a representative of an ethnic armed group, and a mid-level government bureaucrat. And they weren't discussing high-level politics or state budgets. They were meeting to figure out how to simply keep a local bridge operational so the clinic could receive medicine.
That shadow framework of survival, so far removed from the polished diplomatic offices in Beijing or New Delhi, just highlights a painful reality. When formal governance fractures, the burden of securing basic infrastructure and trade continuity falls entirely on the shoulders of ordinary people.
It forces external powers to understand that securing long-term stability isn't just a policy goal. It's a desperate ground-level effort to keep life moving. The emergence of these new, informal routes, coupled with the necessity of these local survival frameworks, shows that China is finding new ways to secure the sea access it has long coveted. It's cementing its influence over Myanmar economically and geopolitically, even in the complete absence of a fully functioning central government. And this is leading regional countries to increasingly participate in China-led policies concerning investment, trade, and even security.
So the competition between India and China for dominance in the Indian Ocean, a rivalry driven by this massive need for resource security and strategic ambition, is no longer limited to naval strategy or diplomatic maneuvering in Delhi and Beijing. It has crashed directly onto the domestic crisis in Myanmar.
And the instability there, symbolized by that silent strike, is a profound political and economic challenge to both the BRI's grand blueprints and India's defensive strategic security planning. It proves that possessing a massive strategic asset like the Kyaukpyu port means very little if the regime that granted you the lease can't even secure the roads, pipelines, and rail lines leading to it.
So for these rising Asian giants, this internal conflict represents the ultimate stress test. How do you secure vital economic corridors and geopolitical footholds when the local government is unstable and the local populace is actively resisting being treated as merely coordinates on a strategic map?
This strategic competition forces all external powers to understand that while they may finance trillion-dollar ports and plan grand railways, the successful long-term integration of any region into a global economic corridor ultimately requires securing the consent and the buy-in of the communities who actually call that corridor home.